Awesome. Welcome, everyone. Whether you're a Jellyfish customer or just coming to check it out, it's great to see so many of you joining us today. I'm Jackson. I'll be your host slash MC, if you will. And I'm pretty excited to be here to talk to you about a topic that personally I'm pretty fascinated in, but I'm sure many of you are. And I'm pretty sure is on the mind of every engineering leader these days. And that's like the measurable, real impact of AI coding tools. So happy to be with you today. As I said, I'm Jackson. I lead customer education here at Jellyfish. So if you've ever joined like one of the persona-specific webinars we have for like EMs or PMs, or if you've taken any academy course, those are some of the areas that I work on. And I'm especially thrilled to be joined by a great panel of folks today. One is a true expert in the space, Robert Freeman from Github, who's got a pretty incredible perspective on the AI landscape from the front line. So Robert, would you mind giving a quick intro?
Yeah, Robert Freeman. So, as you'll notice, Director of Federal Sales at GitHub. I'm actually switching to a more global role, leading the Copilot business at GitHub. So late breaking news there.
Awesome.
But yeah, super excited to be here with Jellyfish as top of mind for our customers at GitHub. Our metrics and measuring the impact of tools like GitHub Copilot.
Awesome. Well, thanks for joining us. Really appreciate it. We also have Ryan Kizielewicz, who's the product manager for Jellyfish's AI Impact product. So we wanted him to join us to guide us through the tool today. So Ryan, you want to say hi?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, my name is Ryan Kizielewicz. As Jackson said, I'm a product manager here at Jellyfish. I've been here about a year, and I'm solely focused on the AI Impact module. So this will probably be a theme that comes up, but it's obviously a very fast changing product and landscape. So just excited to hear Robert's take and continue the conversation.
Awesome. Thank you too. And finally, we have Pamela Bergson, who's a senior engineering manager, who's running the team behind our AI Impact tool, and she's going to be running the Q&A. So throw her some doozies. We've got some time for some Q&A at the end, but throughout the session today, she'll be watching the Q&A panel. Pamela, you want to say hi too?
Sure. I'm in both the position of working on this product and the position of using this product because I'm also trying to figure out what's going well for my folks. So happy to hear what Ryan and Robert have to say.
Awesome. Well, needless to say, folks, we're pretty stacked today. We've got a lot of great stuff to cover. You can't tell from the four-piece agenda slide, but this is meaty today. So it's a bit different and a bit special because we're not just going to talk about this like in the abstract. We're going to get into the details, getting a deeper look at some best practices of the AI Impact tool, but also with some great insights from Robert along the way. So the way we'll kind of do this is we'll start by opening up the conversation sort of on the AI engineering landscape with Robert. And then we'll get into the Jellyfish product and pass it to Ryan to kind of guide us through that impact tool. But as we're going through the product, it's not like a point click, look at this, what this thing does. We're going to approach it by answering like three key questions that kind of need answering or that comes into minds of engineering leaders when it comes to using AI coding tools. So then as we sort of answer the questions in the product, Robert and I will have a fireside chat, if you will, and ask him some insights of his own. We'll then finish up with some resources to help you get the most of your learning journey. And finally, we'll wrap up with some Q&A. Like I said before, you don't need to wait until the end. Please do ask your questions throughout. So Pamela's here is to help field some of those. But of course, the chat is also open too. We love the woohoos. We love any sort of comments. So Robert and I are chatting about some of his insights. We actually would love to hear yours too, because you learn a lot from your peers. So if you have your experiences of AI coding tools, you should share them because it might really inspire someone else. Okay, so let's jump in. Before we kick off with our first topic, I'd love to know a bit about who you all are and who's here today. So a quick poll, no wrong answers here. But what percentage of your team is using an AI coding tool weekly? So maybe you're just starting out a little bit, 0 to 25, all the way up to 75 to 100. So I'll give you about 20 seconds or so to answer that. And once again, there is no wrong answer. So plug in your answers as you will. I would find it interesting to see what this would look like in about 6 months from now. I think it would be pretty different, but
Yeah,
just curiosity.
or if we had completed it, 6 months ago, right?
Yeah, that's true. Very true. Okay. Okay. Interesting spread here. So I hope you all can see this, but yeah, we're at the 50 to 75 mark, takes the cake. But we're pretty evenly spread overall, which I think that it shows the state of engineering and AI tools right now is that there's a lot of excitement, a lot of opportunity, but there's also we're going to dip our toes in a few areas before we, really jump into it. Thanks, folks. Appreciate the participation there. All right, so let's kick this off. I want to open up things with you first, Robert. And I'd love to hear about your perspective on the AI landscape right now at large. So from where you sit at GitHub, you've got a pretty unique vantage point on the entire AI, coding tool system ecosystem. So we've heard a lot about the promise of AI, things like efficiency and getting to higher value work. But for many engineering leaders, the reality is kind of a mix of excitement and concerns, maybe harkening to some of that poll results we saw, but especially around things like adoption, pricing, improving value. So the question for you is kind of what's your perspective on this gap between the promise and the reality? And then how can leaders kind of best navigate that today in your perspective?
Yeah. Promise versus reality is tough because it evolves like the rest of this AI space, almost by the hour. But what we're seeing is the reality of deployments. When we first released GitHub Copilot years ago, a lot of people don't realize, but it was released prior to ChatGPT kind of
Wow.
changing the face of what people thought of in the AI space. But that was one where everyone was like, "Hey, in 2 years, this will write all the code."
Yeah.
And at GitHub, what we're seeing is internally, our autonomous agents are the leading code contributors to GitHub.com, or our kind of monolith. But there, it's not contributing. I wouldn't say it's contributing the majority of the actual code. It's the single largest contributor.
Okay.
When I talk to customers, we see it as high as like 90% of code is being written by AI tools. I would say the reality of our average large enterprise customer with very, very significant legacy code bases, that numbers is much, much smaller. Now the number of users of using AI tools, whether it be Copilot or another, that's almost 100%. And let me caveat with this. But I wouldn't say majority, but a significant portion of those are shadow IT uses. So if you are, if you're an engineering manager, or if you're a decision maker, if you're a C-suite looking at investing in these tools, the reality is your users are using these tools, whether you've
Right.
purchased them or not, and whether they're in controlled, governed spaces or not. People are using Gemini, ChatGPT, some random other one that they downloaded off the App Store.
Yeah.
So it's everywhere. But at this point, I think what we're not seeing is we're not seeing kind of a structured approach to how do use these tools, where do they fit within the SDLC. I think that's the gap we're trying to get over at this point.
Yeah, it's a great point. I mean, even speaking to myself, I mean, I'm not an engineering with coder, but it's something that I think people investigate on their own first and dip their toes in a little bit. And when it starts to become more of like a concrete way of working in these engineering orgs, that'll be a big test, and that'll be interesting to see what that develops like. But great, thanks, Robert. Appreciate the perspective. Okay, let's jump into Jellyfish. Ron, I'm going to hand you the reins in a moment, but could you take us through a little bit about how Jellyfish's AI impact measures and reports on like things like adoption and how we should think about that when it comes to how our engineers use it? So I'll quick stop share and hand it over to you.
Absolutely. Great. Okay. So just to jump in, the big question that we're answering with this page here is, as Jackson was saying, how are my teams adopting AI coding tools? Who's adopting the AI coding tools? And then I think what teams are shifting more to is, how do I get the most adoption? How do I get the most out of my team, getting them using it as much as they possibly can? So a few quick things to call out here. So the way I like to think about this is it's important to have the headlines when you're looking at adoption. So these two graphs at the top here, we want to focus on who is actually looking at these tools, who's using these tools, what are power users, what are casual users, those types of things. But I think a lot of the details are important to actually drive change within your organization. So when I'm looking at the organization level, I'm probably going to be reporting this upward. I care about the fact that if people are using this on a weekly basis, daily basis, those types of things. Also, over time, I want to see those trending upwards. So we see a lot of teams who are maybe struggling early on with adoption, or maybe they start using these tools of the first few weeks. They don't see crazy adoption, but over time, as their team becomes more familiar with it, as they start using the tools more, as the value is proved out, we'll start to see adoption creep up over time. We see idle users become casual users become power users, so on and so forth there. So I think that's a key thing to look out, and big thing here is like not to expect 100% adoption right off the bat there.
Right.
Another thing I'll call out too is, so I mentioned that it's really good to report the organizational things upward, but change is really done on the team level or even on the individual level. So within this too, we'll also show you, okay, what is the adoption breakout by team? What is it by group? All those types of things, because one thing we commonly see is that there might be certain teams who are using this more, might be certain teams who are using this less, and we want to figure out who those teams are so we can start conversations, potentially even start to investigate why certain teams are adopting these more than others. So I think that's a key thing there too. Another area to look at too is just segments. So we can look at manager, location, or skill set, all those types of things. Again, these are all just more details that you might want to look at to figure out, okay, are there certain areas where we're seeing better results than others? Why is that? Are Boston front-end engineers using this tool more than London back-end engineers? Like, why? So those are the types of questions that we want to start, getting more into. And then the last thing here too is code area. So are there certain areas of the code where we're seeing more adoption? Are there certain languages or types of editors? Like, what does that look like? Because again, the details are important here. Maybe we don't expect a certain team or a certain area of the code to be using this tool a lot, but maybe there's another area where we do expect a ton of uses. We're not seeing that. So again, context here is really important. And I think it's something that's pretty crucial to drive change and to start, investigating why, and actually to improve your adoption within your organization there. Awesome. So, sort of paired by that, we're looking also at enabling users too. So this next page is sort of like the big brother to the manage adoption page. This is where we're actually taking action. So in here you'll see all those segments that we broke out earlier. So power users, casual users, idle users, and new users. Again, it's really important to distinguish who's falling in what category, not to necessarily like blame people for not using the tool as much, but to really get down to the why or the root cause of why certain people are within these organizations or within these groups here. So for example, we see power users, that's great. We want to know that, but we might want to look at some idle users, some people who we've given a license to, but they're not using it as much. Like, why is that happening? Are they not enabled? Are they not finding value in the tool? Like, spurring those conversations, I think, is a really important part that we'll have to look at here. I'm curious what Robert's take is on this, but a few things that I've seen from customers who are trying to level up different groups of people is that it's important to leverage your power users here. So if you have people using this a ton, let's figure out why. Like, why are they getting a ton of value out of it? Why are they using it so much? And then let's evangelize them. Let's connect them with some people who might not use it as much. Let's share that knowledge, and let's connect those people so we can get people to sort of graduate up certain levels there.
The idea of like a champions program internally is something we see encourage a lot. There's definitely, one of the biggest challenges we see with adoption, not from the perspective of getting, from 1 to 10,000 users, but from the perspective of getting from a casual or non-user to a power user. So kind of individual adoption is there's a lot of confusion is not the right word, but there's a gap in the knowledge on how to use these tools. And a lot of that has to do with the velocity with which they're changing. So like the way I would use these tools 6 months ago versus now is very different based on, whether it's a feature set, whether it's just capability of models, prompting style or context style, like all those pieces come into play. And what has been most ideal is having these champion programs that come, and these are internal users that they're familiar with, the processes within your enterprise, and they're saying, this is how I've been successful working with our code bases doing this. We at GitHub, we try to provide, best practices as much as possible, but we also try to avoid being overly prescriptive, because the idea behind GitHub has always been that we're a home for developers, not home for agile developers doing Java to code development or something, right? Like the idea is that we're here for whatever you want to do, whatever you want to build, however you want to build it, and so the best practices we give usually are much more high level, but that's a huge kind of upskiller, is the ability to have these champion programs, these power users, and use them as a kind of a force multiplier from a training perspective to up your users.
Yeah, that's great. And that answered the question I was going to ask, like, how do you, or what have you seen work for companies that aren't just like, here's a tool, it's like a light switch that everyone's like, great, let's just start using it. It's how do we, enable them and adopt that at scale.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. So what I was talking about was like, how do I upscale a user? But
mhm,
that second piece is, how do I go from one to, if I have
right.
1,000 developers, 10,000 developers, 20,000 developers, whatever it might be, like, how do I get them using them? And that the champion program is helpful, but you kind of have to build the champions first, right?
Yeah, that's right.
So enablement is key, and I'm not talking about like, hey, let's do a record a webinar, send that out, and like that's all we're gonna do. It needs to be early and often, and
Hmm.
continual. So because of the pace of change, having office hours, identifying folks that maybe aren't using the tool,
Yep.
and doing some amount of active reaching out, specifically because what we found is, we can see pretty fast adoption of these AI tools to somewhere in the like 60 to 70% range.
Okay.
And then a lot of times we hit, I wouldn't call it a wall, but we see a mass slowing of adoption. So, from 0 to 60, maybe at a really engaged customer, we can get there within weeks.
Hmm.
But getting from like 60 to 70% it might take 3x, 4x that time. And a lot of that is driven by a trust issue.
Sure.
And a lot of that is driven by, again, not just being given a tool, throwing a tool and being like, this is what works, instead of being enabled on the tool, and the tool being kind of fit for purpose, being really more than just another AI tool that someone is hawking, but more, a tool that is a platform that's thought of as like we like to think of it, when you bring GitHub in, as a partnership, right? We're there for you to be
Yeah.
successful. When you are successful with our AI tools, you'll use more of our AI tools, more of your users will use it, and that'll expand. And so we're pretty heavily invested when we work with a customer to drive this idea of a partnership, and making your users as successful as possible, and building trust so they know what AI is good at,
Mm.
and what AI is not good at this point in time, because that's the biggest kind of downgrader of trust is, someone will throw like update this app from Java to Rust, and you throw it in, and there's like 50,000 lines of code, right? Like the chance that that's going to be successful is very low, as opposed
Right.
to using AI to identify, like, how do I break this into tasks, subtasks, and then how do I approach this, and then taking those into consumable bits, and moving forward that way.
Yeah, I think that's spot on too, is that like because our knowledge, even our usage of AI is still being worked out and being discovered, it's like the light switch of we have a tool now, use it. I can see how there's the excitement phase of, oh my gosh, cool, this is gonna help me. But if it doesn't make that jump of this is how it affects my day-to-day work and my actual workflows, and it's not ingrained now into my like role, if you will, I can see that being the case. So like knowing like what good prompts are like, how that's going to be effective, and repeatable prompts that make your job a little bit more streamlined. So it's going to take a lot of practice, like you said. So I can see that plateau absolutely happening, like with probably any major new tool. Awesome. Well, thank you. So let's move on. Now that we talked a little bit about what adoption looks like and kind of how to encourage and monitor that, how about after that? So how do we not just get people to use AI tools, but how do we as engineering org maximize the impact that they have for our teams? So Ryan, you want to walk us through that next step?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, to state the obvious, a lot of these, you don't buy these tools so you can get adoption. You buy these tools because you are expecting something out of it. So, of course, here the maximize impact page is going to be the key thing that we're looking at. So I'll show you a few things on this page, but the way I like to think about this is in terms of leading indicators and lagging indicators. So we see here we're looking at issue cycle time, we're looking at PR cycle time, we're looking at PR throughput. I like to view issue cycle time and PR cycle time as sort of our leading indicators here, and PR throughput being our lagging indicator. What I really mean here is that issue cycle time and PR cycle time are great metrics, but they are metrics to measure productivity. Obviously, a lot of people want to get productivity gains out of these tools, but I think what the important thing to actually look at here is what you're actually delivering. So you want to be more productive so you can actually deliver more as a result of these tools. So when we're looking at things like the issue cycle time and the PR cycle time here, these are great early indicators. They can tell us, pretty quickly the second we start getting these tools, what are some of the results that we're seeing here. But as we're thinking about reporting upwards, talking to boards, talking to our CEOs, they want to make sure that we're actually shipping more as a result of that. So that's where we're looking at things like the PR throughput, where we can actually measure and say, hey, we started using Copilot a few months ago. Because of that, we've shipped, 50 more PRs a month, and we've shipped, 10 more issues a month. Like there is actual tangible value there that we can illustrate to board CEOs and non-technical audiences that is related to, real tangible business impact. So I think that's an important thing to call out there. Interpreting this graph specifically, one thing that we like to see is that as your team uses tools like Copilot more, we are not only seeing the percentage of PRs that are using Copilot increase, but that overall number of PRs increase. So we want to see that the pie itself is growing and growing as we're using these tools more. That to me is what I view as success for some of these tools. I think another key thing to look at is, again, like the nuance is important here. So looking at things like PR size, PR code complexity, review intensity, those are also really important to view as well, because maybe we're seeing different gains for small PRs versus large PRs. And as an engineering leader, I might want to know that. I might want to know, if I have an engineer who's working on a really small ticket or a really large ticket, what they should be using, if it's worthwhile to use Copilot or if it's just worthwhile to just do my own thing. That's where we can get into some of the details around the impact of large PRs versus the impact of small PRs, things like that. Again, I think that the details really matter here.
Mhm.
Another thing I'll touch on too is code ratio. So code ratio, I feel like, is a very buzzy concept, especially on LinkedIn. You'll hear a lot about it. You'll hear people say, they have 90% code written by AI. Regardless if that's true, we want to show that to you. So we want to show you, okay, what percentage of your code is actually being written by AI, and how is that trending over time? I think the big thing that I care about here is the gains that you're getting out of some of that increase in code ratio. So, we're seeing that Copilot's writing 20% of our code. What does that actually mean for me and my team? And there's sort of two things that I like to think from that. So one would be similar to like a concept I call leverage. So, if AI is writing a bunch of code, or we're sending it on KTLO or bug issues, that to me, as maybe a senior engineer, that frees up some of my time to work on things that are maybe closer to the product or more important or just a little bit higher level. My skills are being leveraged to the maximum, as opposed to me just spending hours and hours on bugs and things like that. So what we look for in a lot of the data is we want to see that people are investing more and more time into growth as we're using AI more. That tells us that AI is freeing up a bunch of time. It's not just taking lines for the sake of taking lines. We are actually able to work on more impactful things as a result of that, and I think that's a huge win there.
Yeah.
The same thing goes for issues resolved. Like we want to make sure that we're checking the boxes on the actual outcomes and outputs, and those are increasing too. So let's monitor those. Let's see, as we increase issue cycle time, let's see how that affects issues resolved, and we obviously want to see that go up and up and up. So yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, Ryan. I think like this, and you might agree, like this tab specifically is really where the tool shines. It's like showing the effects of where and how your team is using, or even sometimes not using AI coding tools, but specifically around like things like PR throughput. So Robert, Ryan showed us how AI usage can sort of correlate to some of these business outcomes like cycle time, PR throughput, etc. But from your perspective, what's the most important metric a leader should be looking at to prove the value and ROI of AI? And then I guess a follow-up is like, what's your advice on how they can maximize impact across their org?
Uh, that's a trick question, by the way. It's
Gotcha.
because you singular metric, right? Like,
Yeah.
this has to be holistic. And I think what Jellyfish provides on the quantitative side is key, because a lot of times, the CI and CEOs, when we're chatting with them, that's what they want. They want those hard numbers, and they want to be able to be like, I compare this to this. Whether using AI or not, like tools like Jellyfish are key, because when I go in and a CEO is like, hey, what can how are you going to prove to me that I'm more productive?
Hmm.
I always ask them the same question. Say, okay, well, how are you measuring productivity from your developer community right now? And I have yet to have anyone answer me with anything other than we aren't, right? They're just not doing it. So if you don't know how productive your developers are, and let me caveat that with a little bit of, I would tend to always look at it in aggregate. How productive our teams of developers, our organization? How productive is my this group or that group? And that is because software development is a team sport, right? Developers are,
Yeah.
are writing code, but they're also getting inputs from other aspects of the business, those that are writing requirements, testing groups, security arms, the folks that are doing O&M and maintenance on the infrastructure that these tools are going to run in. And that informs a lot of times how productive a developer is. Looking through the kind of the chat, I'm not going to answer any specific questions at this point, but like there's a lot of comments on, like, I know there was a comment around, hey, we're seeing these PR cycles go up, but the actual cycle time is going down. Like how often these are being reviewed, and a lot of that is because, hey, AI is writing all this extra code, right? Or I'm as a developer, I can be much more productive. So I'm 20%, 30% more productive.
Hmm.
Well, if when we talk about adoption globally, if the rest of my organization aren't using these tools, if they're not using the code review, tools like Copilot Code Review or TaskRabbit, or not TaskRabbit, CodeRabbit, or some of these others, then
Hmm.
you're just creating a bottleneck somewhere else, right? Because this code does need to review, and if you can be AI assisted with the development of the software itself, the writing of the code, you need that same thing to happen on the review side, on the security scanning side. All of these places, you're gonna create a bottleneck if you're not. So as far as a single metric, you know, I don't think there is one. I think
Yeah.
it's very holistic, and you need to be looking at the qualitative type things, right? Like what am I putting out from a peer's perspective? How complex are they? Am I writing a bunch of extra code? Maybe that's a bad thing. Maybe I'm generating a bunch of like AI slop, and I need to look at that, and that's causing reductions in ship times because of the review cycle is longer. Um,
Hmm.
but there really needs to be, like, an organization also needs to look at this qualitatively and say, okay, well, how happy are my developers? Because that's
Yeah.
a big portion. Is that going to that's going to impact, turnover, ability to hire, obviously pay comes into play when you start talking about this. But also kind of like, uh, general quality of life on these AI tools is a big mover as well. Because what we find is when folks no longer have to do the boring boilerplate, I got to build this API interface, when in reality I built it 100 times and I just need to make some small changes. Like, those are things that are AI right now, and really for the last couple of years have been super good at.
Hmm.
Documentation, test coverage. Those are all small things that most developers, except for ones that are probably insane, don't like doing. They're
Yeah.
monotonous, they're boring. Like,
Competitive.
most
Yep.
developers want to get to, hey, what I want to do is I want to do problem solving, I want to do the creative components, I want to discuss do solution engineering. That's where you get that, like, that kind of creative itch that most developers end up kind of in this field because of. When they can spend more of their time on those things, one, they're going to be more creative. Two, what they're going to generate is that like the secret sauce that makes companies unique, right? 90%
Yeah.
of this open source boilerplate shit, and then apologize for my language, by the way. And then the extra 10%, that's the special sauce. That's the things the developers see pride in, and they get excited and say, "Hey, I built that. That's a unique construct that I thought through, came up with the idea of," and they take pride in it.
Yeah, no, that's really, really good. I appreciate that insight. Okay, cool. We want to move on to the final piece that Ryan will show, but before we do that, we do have like a two-part poll, if you go. We love polls, what we say, but we would like some participation here. So the first one is, which tool are your teams using the most? I know there's multiple tools out there, so that's why there's the other category there. But of the ones there, which one would you say they're using the most? And the next one will be, in 12 months, how many AI tools do you expect your organization to be using? So first, answer the first one, and then we'll launch the next one after we get a couple answers. And for the first question, take about 15, 20 seconds or so.
It's unfortunate you're not letting me vote on any of these. I would try to gas
Sway.
Copilot
Yeah.
on, but
I'd vote for it too, don't worry. Well, you're in luck, Robert. That's the number one, 51% GitHub Copilot. That's number one. Then we have a lot of Claude code. Yeah. Also, some of these are, I mean, I admittedly I don't know some of the age of some of these tools, but I'd really be curious of what the other is. So maybe in the chat, actually, if there's other ones people are using, I'd be curious
yeah, I mean,
of which
Amazon
ones.
Q is kind of on its way out, right? Like they released Kiro, which, again, I work for GitHub, but Kiro is a good tool. A lot of we've introduced a lot of like spec-based coding, post that being released because of the value we saw in that. So I would imagine that's some of the other, and then there's just like the open source things. I use a lot of those, like Klein and Kilo and some of these others. There's so many, but I think that's the future. I think so much more is going to be talked about the application layer, and we're going to stop talking about like GPT 5.1 when it comes
Yeah.
out, and Sonnet 4.5 or 4 or whatever. Like those are becoming abstracted as they kind of regress to the mean. And it's more and more about the agentic framework, the application layer, the governance and controls at the enterprise level.
Yeah, more specific and targeted in their usage. We're gonna have AI coding tools to create AI coding tools at some point here. So in the next 12 months, how many AI tools do you expect to use? Almost everybody said about 2 to 5. And I mean, I don't know what the norm would be there, but I feel like that's pretty consistent with what we've seen too. But we're seeing things like Windsurf in the chat. Yeah, Amazon Q, a couple others mentioned here. So
yeah.
Cool. Thanks, folks. Okay, Ryan, why don't you I'll pass it back to you. Take us home and walk us through how Jellyfish can kind of help leaders understand which tools are the right ones and for what.
Yeah, definitely. So before I actually jump into that, so I just one thought on the poll there too. I definitely can see the trend that we're seeing is that teams are adopting more and more tools. So that is definitely what I'm seeing. What I'm also seeing too is that there are just more tool categories entering the market. So, we're very heavily focused on these AI coding tools right now, but you could imagine like as we start to delve into PR tools, like that is a whole category of things that people want to look at. You might want tools for, to incorporate like design tools. You might want tools for research. Like that's the sort of the way that we've been seeing things, that all these, different vendors are just popping up and up and up. So it'll be really interesting to see sort of how that evolves with like different, entirely different markets of tools as well.
Yeah, the breadth of capabilities, things you didn't even think of, years past, that we're starting to see. Like we're starting to see a lot of the generative AI tool, like the diffusion model, so image, especially mostly the image capabilities, starting to pop up a lot. So people are using them for like some of the documentation. So it's automatically being generated to provide visualizations on both documentation as well as some of the within the tools themselves from a graphing analytics standpoint, how to display or visualize these things. And I wouldn't have predicted so many of these things that are coming out of the creative side of the world to start to pop in. And even now, I haven't seen a lot, but a handful of times I've seen folks starting to use text to speech to start to enable their files. So you can like, hey, this is more accessible. There's an accessibility component here. Maybe there's vision impaired folks. I can now use text-to-speech models to automatically generate updated, basic voiceovers for my README files as
Cool.
part of every PR that comes through.
Wow. Yeah, on the note of just this is a random one note of image creation. I feel like we're still a ways off from making that like really perfect. Things like coding and text-based things and content, I feel like is getting really streamlined now. But I've struggled with image creating with AI in some ways, but
Yep.
TBD. All right, Ryan, floor is yours.
Cool. So one thing I didn't show, I showed a bunch of the different pages here, but we can look at all these pages through a different lens. What we're looking at right now is actually looking at these tools through all tools view. So a lot of times I'll speak with engineering leaders and they might have, as we saw, like they might have 2 to 5 different tools within their organization. Sometimes they don't necessarily care if one engineer is preferring one tool over the other. What they really just want to make sure is that their engineering team is equipped and are using some AI tools because, for all the different reasons, that's an important aspect there. So as we look through the product here, we can see that, we might necessarily want to break down, okay, what is the adoption of GitHub versus Claude here? We just want to make sure, okay, are people power users in AI in general? Is that growing over time? And what does that look like? So adoption, we have that covered here. Same with enable users, but also maximize impact too. So again, like similar to the adoption piece, we're looking at all tools. We're also answering the question here about, what is the effect of AI on my engineering team? So broadening it up, making it super, super diverse there with what we're looking at. That's a big question that we see. So, not necessarily getting into like the nitty gritty, what are people using here? We can simply answer, hey, when you're using AI, regardless of what it is, we're seeing a 12% decrease in issue cycle time. So that's one piece there. Sort of the exact opposite of that is the mentality of like what tools are performing better than others. So you can also see the breakdown tool with like adoption, issue cycle time, PR cycle time, things like that. This is demo data, of course, but I'm able to see that certain tools maybe we have better adoption for one tool versus the other. Maybe certain tools we see different swings on impact of issue cycle time and PR cycle time. So that is constantly something that we can continue to look at and evaluate our tool sets. Again, here we can look at throughput and all that kind of stuff. So where I see this going to is not just looking at what tools are doing better than others, but I think maybe the proper question here is actually what tools are better than others at certain use cases. So you could see a world where maybe Copilot's better at front end, but if I'm working on back end, maybe we're working on a different tool. And like what are all the different combinations of tools that I can use to get the most output? So you can see even like imagine an IC even debating, hey, I'm working on this front end ticket in this repository, and it's about this size of a PR. Like, what tool should I work on? Those types of questions I think are going to be more and more important as time goes on. And then the last thing here too, just one thing that Robert mentioned too around like gauging your team. So another area that we're also looking at is like the qualitative side of things. So not only showing what's the impact of AI, but what does your team in general think about all of AI and all these tools, and then also how are they enabled? What do they think about individual tools? Where are they seeing gains? Those types of questions. So yeah, I'm just really excited to get into some of that stuff too in the future.
So yeah, I know that all tools is a bit newer to our product here, and then even just hearing some reactions in the chat, people are pumped about this one. This is off the cuff here, Ryan, but scroll down to the tool breakdown. Like if I'm an engineering leader and I'm looking at the tool breakdown there, and I see like how Claude code clearly looks a little different than the rest of them, what would you kind of speculate as of like, well, how would you read that? I guess because that purple bar is pretty large. So are they mostly power users because they're mostly writing code, or how would you kind of read this at a quick glance?
Yeah, so yeah, definitely in this particular case, we're seeing that like Claude and Windsurf and Gemini have their fair share of power users. I think like context is important for all this stuff. So
Sure.
This could be expected. I might expect that like I'm testing Claude with a guinea pig or a small group of people. So I hope that they're using this every day and they're testing this out. Whereas a larger tool like GitHub Copilot, if I'm looking at adoption, I might see more casual users there. That might be expected and things like that. So yeah, I definitely think it's important to consider the context around all the things that we're showing here, the number of users, the adoption areas, and then the effect on, of course, those key metrics of issue cycle time and PR cycle time.
Totally. Yeah, it'll look different for different teams, orgs, et cetera. So
Yeah.
cool. Okay, so Robert, we sort of answered this a little bit already, but just to bring it home a little, we've seen a lot of engineering teams using multiple tools, like we saw even our poll showed that too, but I guess what we call like a multi-tool reality, if you will. So from your perspective, at the heart of the AI coding landscape, how can engineering leaders kind of make sense of this? Like, how do we juggle all these tools at once? And then like, what are some strategies, I guess, for evaluating and leveraging different tools for different use cases beyond like code generation for things like code review, debugging, architectural discussions, things like that?
Yeah, I think when we first envisioned, the way this would work was that, someone being an enterprise, so a company would say, "Hey, I'm making my choice,"
Hmm.
and that honestly is what we saw for the first year and a half or so. More recently, what we're seeing is what we probably should have expected. Very rarely do you go to a large enterprise and they're all using VS Code, right? Like
Hmm.
you have certain people that are like, nope, you know what? I'm a JFrog person, or I use I don't know why I'm blanking on the millions of of IDs available, but you know
Sure.
what I mean? They're like tools in general. They're especially in any creative space, which I like to think of developers as part of the creative space. They become subjective. You can
Yeah.
argue like this is the best tool for this. Well, it might not be the best tool for you for this. And so we're starting to see a little bit of divide on these generative AI tools.
Hmm.
There's a couple risks with that. And I think some of these will start to go away, and there will be, it'll align kind of the way we see IDs, where a traditional large enterprise will have, 80, 90% of their folks on one platform, and maybe there's some like outliers based on, the code we're using is better over here. Like we're a ball Python shop, and so we're all using PyCharm or whatever.
Yeah.
But on the coach side, the risks are mostly involving in around capability at this point. We're at the point where features matter a lot. And
Yeah.
a tool, unlike in the ID space where you might have a tool and the two tools you're looking at, one covers 98% of what you want and the other one is 99% of the one you want, right? Like, so it's just like this one power feature. In the coaching space, like it's very different. You look at, Claude Code was brought up. I think someone said, "Hey, it's all the new hotness. Everyone's talking about it." And that was I say that was true. GPT-5, as much as there's been some kind of dogging of it lately as well, it's taken a lot of bite out of. We were seeing it all the time, and now we're
Yeah.
starting to see it slightly less. It's probably that and Cursor are the things we compete with most. But the deal with Claude Code, the reason we don't see it a lot at the enterprise level is it's very prescriptive.
Hmm.
And by that I mean it's primarily historically has been only CLI, and there's a lot of folks, whether it's capable or not capable, there's a lot of strong feelings on I only want to work in the CLI, or I don't want to use CLI at all, or somewhere in between. And so being prescriptive like that, I think that pigeonholed them a little bit. That's starting to change.
Sure.
They're trying to be more broad. At the same time, at GitHub, we don't currently offer a CLI offering. Upcoming news on that, as anyone would expect. That won't be for long. But the thing that we do offer and is really important in the enterprise space is a lot of the governance enterprise controls that some of these pop-ups and startups don't have yet. I would expect they'll start to roll that way.
Yeah.
Copilot is interesting because we GitHub Copilot. I should clarify. I'm on calls all the time with Microsoft folks.
There's a couple named out there.
Yeah, it's not the same. But we built a platform that said, hey, we can do all these things, but at the same time, there are preferences. And so we see a lot of times where organizations are 80% Copilot, and then they have a group that are using Cursor, Claude Code, Windsurf, whatever it might be. And then things are getting pushed into GitHub, and then we're using some of the branch protection and governance rules and our security suites and stuff like that to kind of secure and avoid some of the risks.
Mhm.
As those control functions and what those look like and how we interact with agents evolves, I think we'll actually see more of that. And by that I mean, like, Claude is actually very good at front end development. Like it does. It's probably, of the cogen tools, I would say, with standard web frameworks, it handles it really, really well. The only ones that compete with it are actually, or at least in my opinion, are some of the open source models. A lot of those
Okay.
are, now they tend to be crap at back end, but so we have groups that are saying, hey, this group is doing all this front end stuff. We're gonna tie them into Claude Code for right now, and but the rest of these folks that are more generalists, like, this makes sense. Let's keep them on here.
Mhm.
So we do see a lot of folks that are buying multiple tools, usually some sort of generalist tool, Microsoft Copilot,
Right.
ChatGPT, Claude Desktop, name the 5,000 of them. There's a million of those. And then they're also stacking that with their developers or folks that are somewhere developer adjacent, are then using a code tool like GitHub Copilot.
Yeah.
My expectation is that will continue, and the hardest part as an engineering leader is going to be making sure that uh, the controls are in place, especially around external access. So most of it's MCP now. So MCP controls, like, which
Yeah.
MCP servers are we allowing? What if they reaching out? What in that MCP server is it allowed being touched? Like, if I'm a user, am I inheriting the controls, and so I can only access this part of this database? Because those are the risks that as an engineering leader I would be most concerned about. Is, am I
Yeah.
going to leak something? Because it becomes, with these AI tools, it becomes really easy to access lots of data
Very
and
true.
spew it somewhere else.
Yep, that's very true. It's a really good call out actually. But yeah, I feel like it's going to be harder in some ways because there's going to be more and more tools, and so there's going to be more choices. So it's that, again, I'd say, is pretty contextual as well when it comes to the
Yeah,
choice.
some of that I think we'll see, like, we're seeing like mass expansion, right? I think that'll come back a little
They'll
bit.
hone it in.
There's well, you saw it with a lot of the pricing structure changes. Cursor changed their prices again. We've changed our prices in the past, and that's because the cost model that we use isn't based in reality of our costs.
Okay.
So anyone that's complaining about, like, hey, this seems so expensive, like, go use straight API and you'll realize that, like, inference is expensive. That's going to come down. And
Hmm.
that'll kind of normalize that. But you're seeing a lot of the ones that kind of popped up and we're like, hey, I got to do AI because AI is the thing, that are starting to either get out of it or just disappear completely because there's no more VC money that's paying for the overspend. And so that is one thing I would look at if I'm looking at a tool, is like sustainability, survival. Like, if I decide to engineer my SDLC around a specific tool, is it going to exist in 3 months, 6 months, a year,
Sure.
years? Because we're talking a lot about adoption and migration on these tools and how you guys are measuring productivity. It would be, it'd be a tough pill to swallow to spend all of the investment that is involved in not only adopting the tool but proving that it has real value. So spending money on the tools, spending money on tools like Jellyfish, and then you get a year down the road and you're like, man, we're getting great value out of this, and then it's like, oh well, the tool is defunct. Not
Yep.
because it
It's
wasn't a
gone
good
now.
tool, but
Yeah.
because the business side didn't exist, and now you're doing the same thing with another tool.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. It's good stuff. Well, this has been great, Robert. I mean, just having you share your perspective and also, yeah, guide us from what you've seen and what your suggestions are has been awesome. So I'll go back to sharing really quick here. 1 second, folks. Make sure you're seeing that. Okay, so we do want to have some time for live Q&A. So start typing your questions now. I'm going to try and read some of those out. Thank you, by the way, Pamela and Ryan. I know that it's been blowing up in there and you've been crushing it. So, and thank you for all the questions, folks. This is great to see a lot of engagement. Okay, so for those of you who are customers, first of all, thank you. We couldn't do any of this without you. But for you, we have a couple resources here you can access. So this webinar covered a lot, and it was a lot of perspective, and it was a lot of an in-depth view from Ryan, the PM here. But there's a Quantifying AI Impact Academy course. So like if you have folks, if you're starting to get your toes wet a little bit in the actual tool itself, then this course would be great. It covers what we covered today, just a bit of a higher level, but kind of just helps on learning on how to maximize the tool usage and what the tool shows you and how to best use it. We also have a very chunky help center. So we've got a ton of great content for AI impact in there, including an FAQ article that covers a lot of the questions around the tool itself, but tons and tons of things to read about in the help center. So those are two for customers. And for our hopeful future customers and those just exploring today, I want to invite you to explore the AI Research Library on our website. We keep it updated with the latest data from our research team. So we're going to throw a link to that in the chat. Thank you, marketing team. There's a easy access for there. And then, as you may have heard, the 2025 DORA report was released this week. And so it's all about the state of AI-assisted software development. No surprise there for anybody, but it's packed with lots of great data and findings. And as the gold sponsor, Jellyfish is actually offering a deep dive into the insights with DORA lead Nathan Harvey, and that's on October 30th. So don't miss that one. And there'll be a link for that too. And yeah, we've went through a lot today. I think there was a lot to listen to, a lot to cover, a lot of good stuff. And for those of you not a Jellyfish customer yet and kind of want to see a personalized demo of our AI Impact product, our team is happy to meet with you in the coming weeks and answer any questions, get a personalized demo there too. Okay, we'll do a bit of live Q&A here. We've got about 9 minutes or so. So you're welcome to put it into the chat. You're welcome to put it in the Q&A panel. But
I can
go ahead, Pamela. Yeah.
I can kick us off. I've been jotting down some things that came up
Thank
in
you.
the chat that were a little too rich for me to just kind of like one off.
Sure.
So one of the sort of themes we're seeing a lot here is that people really want to be able to say something about the business impact of all of this, not just pull requests or whatever. Kiz, what can you say about how we're thinking about that and what they can do now, what they could do later?
Yeah, definitely. So cost is one thing that has definitely come up. So a lot of people are not only looking for productivity gains out of these tools, but you want to make sure that the productivity gains are basically worth what you're getting. So if you're getting 2x out of one tool, but you're paying $1 million a year for it versus 1.8x, and you're paying 50 grand a year for it, that might be a trade-off you want to consider there. So with that said, one thing we're looking into, of course, is getting a cost estimate for some of these tools and understanding how much are you spending on tokens, how much are you spending here, and what is the relative value of all that, comparing productivity alongside some of the costs there. So that is definitely a key piece here. Another angle that we're considering too is looking at insights that are further downstream than just engineering. So I talked about like leading indicators and lagging indicators. We want to make sure that we're seeing improvements in issue cycle time so we can ship more. But then we also want to consider answering the question of, hey, we shipped this thing. What did it get us? Did it get us, an increase in MAVs? Did it get us a few extra sales come through the door? Like looking at some of those downstream insights that could also provide, especially leaders some more insight and value into some of these tools. So really what we're trying to do is get a whole sense of the software development lifecycle and even past that if we can there.
Awesome. Follow-ups in the chat if that piqued your interest. We're also seeing a lot of more specific questions about how we decide what code is AI and what code is not, right? Because we're showing like, oh, this pull request was probably AI assisted, this one wasn't. Do you want to talk about that? Want me to talk about that?
Yeah, I can talk about it. If you want to chime in too, then you're welcome. So yeah, right now, basically how we're doing it is we're looking at, when we see similar timestamps for somebody using GitHub or somebody, making commits in the code, like we can make that association. So that is sort of like how we pair that right now. Basically how we're thinking about it is like, if you are, using this tool for any PR, then we could consider that to be what we call like AI assisted. I think what the evolution of this will be, and something that I was actually just talking about yesterday with my team, is not just taking like a binary approach where we're saying, hey, is this PR AI assisted or not, but looking at it with a little bit more nuance. So saying, how much of this ticket was AI assisted? Was it one single line of code, or was it 99% of the lines within this? That to me is a huge difference. So the path I see us going further and further down is not just taking that simple binary approach there, but giving you context into low, medium, high, none in terms of AI assistance, because I think that's a big difference that we want to start calling out with some of these PRs. Anything you want to add there, Pamela?
I think you got it.
Nice,
And
Ryan.
speaking of pull requests, I see one of the sort of common findings that people are talking about in the chat is that they're looking specifically at the PR cycle time. Like issue cycle time has gone down, but PR cycle time seems really to have gone up. Robert or Kiz, either of you, is that something you've seen? Where should people start looking? What's up with that?
Yeah, I think I touched on that just a little bit, but let me expand on the couple reasons I've seen that. I'm sure there's other reasons, and maybe someone, Ryan or Jackson or someone has some insight as well. But so firstly, what I mentioned before was bottlenecking based on like, if well, I'll give you a really good example. When I was in high school, I ran track, and I was the anchor leg on the 4x100. I don't know, most
Me too.
people put the fastest kid as the anchor leg. I was the slowest of the group. And and so if you looked at average time and you actually looked at the other runners, you'd be like, well, they're much faster than that. I was the bottleneck right on that team. And if a bunch of your developers are generating code and they're AI assisted and they're starting to see a productivity ramp, but they're not also using those the code review tools, you're gonna create a bottleneck where you're generating more than you can physically review at a time. So that's the one. The other piece is we see this productivity, like if there's like a productivity curve with AI, right? Instead of going like that, it actually goes like it kind of dips and then drives. And so we see this immediate bump where folks don't entirely know how to use the tool, and they're attempting different ways, and they're oftentimes feeling more productive. But in reality, like the figuring out the prompt, the figuring out where to use this versus that, how to use the tool, where best to use the tool, like that actually generates a productivity hit. And that depending on the organization, we see that impact maybe for a week or two, or as much as maybe a month or so, right? That's pretty common that as folks start to use these tools, they actually see a little bit of pullback of productivity, even if you ask them and they say, oh, I'm so much more productive, and then you look at the numbers and you're like, well, you're actually, you're 20% less productive.
Yeah. It's almost like explaining like what can it do? I'm like testing it out, but you haven't put that into actual productivity yet. So yeah,
and that's a reevaluation. Like as you go and as like these have gotten better, different things. Initially it's like I'm just gonna have it write the code and do like tab complete on some lines, and now folks, the most productive users in the orgs I'm seeing, they're the ones that have started to embrace like the agentic component. So doing asynchronous, autonomous, the coding agents from all of us now have them, whether Cloud Code or GitHub Copilot, and sending out a task. But the ones that are successful are the ones that have figured out how do I break these tasks into components that these agents are going to be successful and good at, as opposed to just throwing like one line prompt that says like solve all my problems and then hope that it's successful. It's instead like working through and identifying, okay, this task is really 7 subtasks. I'm going to give these 6 to an agent, and I'm going to do this last one myself, and that's how I'm going to accomplish this. And you have a much higher success rate there.
Yeah, that's why I said prompting, learning how to prompt effective is also honestly part of it. So it's probably part of the learning curve. Which, fun fact, by the way, I was also on the 4x1 relay, Robert. So we have something in common.
Were you also the slowest one?
I'll never.
You don't have to comment. You don't have
I was
to
number 1, so yeah, probably. Awesome. Well, I know we got a pretty hard stop today, but finally, I just want to say a huge thank you to everyone who came. I know these sessions take time out of your day, so we appreciate you spending that time with us. Another massive thank you to you, Robert, for giving us gold today and providing great insight. Really appreciate your guidance there. And then thank you, Jellyfish team, Ryan for your guidance of the product, Pamela for fielding all these amazing questions that I could never even dream of answering. Thank you very much. But well, you'll get a recording of this session in an email later this week. But yeah, hope it was enjoyable, hope it was helpful, insightful, and hope to see you at the next deep dive.
Yeah, good chatting with you guys.
Too.
Thanks for having me.